Welcome to today's final session, in our three-part Financial Capability Month webinar series. My name is Armida Riojas, and I'm the Director of Economic Education at the Dallas Fed. In my role, I lead a team of experts that develop and share programs and resources, especially designed for educators across Texas, New Mexico, and Louisiana. It is probably of no surprise to all of you in our audience here today that April is nationally recognized as Financial Capability Month to highlight the importance of financial education. In recognition of this, we have taken our participants through the state of financial education and talked to a panel of experts in the industry about best practices and the impact of COVID-19 and what has had on our personal savings. And yesterday, we had an insightful presentation and discussion with the historian at the Kansas City Fed, Tim Todd. He took us through the history of the first African-American banks and the impacts that have led to present-day unbanked populations. Today's webinar will take a closer look at our Dallas Fed publication, Building Wealth, and the new features of the publication, including lesson plans and a digital platform. I will set up our discussion today by sharing with you a little bit of background information on the Building Wealth publication. It was first published in 1999 as an introductory guidance to individuals and families seeking help to develop a plan for building personal wealth. The publication presents an overview of wealth building strategies for consumers, community leaders, students, and teachers. This is a free publication, as many of you already know, that it's available both in English and Spanish, and it also comes with complimentary materials, including lesson plans for the classroom, an online guide, and a virtual platform. So let's get us started. But before I introduce our speaker for today, I want to share some housekeeping items with you. First, we'd like to ask that you please stay on mute. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. And if you have any questions, please use the raise your hand function and we will call on you. Or you can also feel free to drop your question in the chat at the bottom of your screen. If you're experiencing any technical issues, please send a private chat message to Evelyn Blanchard and we will do our best to assist you. So today's presenter is Morgan Ackley, Economic Education Advisor here at the Dallas Fed. In her role, she supports educators across the 11th District with professional development trainings and writes curriculum for educators in the areas of economics, finance, and college and career education. Morgan started her career in Woodinville, Washington as a high school teacher and college and career counselor. She taught classes in AP microeconomics as well as macroeconomics. She also taught courses in business, marketing, and finance. Prior to joining the Dallas Fed, Morgan was a teacher in the Frisco Independent School District. She holds a master's in economics and entrepreneurship education from the University of Delaware. So having said all that, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan Ackley.
Perfect. Thank you, Armida, for that introduction. And thank you for everyone that's joining us today. Before I get started, I wanted to let you know that the views expressed are my own and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the Federal Reserve System. So Building Wealth covers the foundations of financial capability. There are many free resources developed at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And Building Wealth originally has started off as that publication, as Armida mentioned, and additional resources have been added over the years. As you can see on the slide, there are resources for consumers, community leaders, teachers, and students available on our website. And the Building Wealth publication represents an overview or an introduction to personal wealth building strategies. It's available online and can be downloaded as a PDF, or you can even order those free copies of the print publication in English and in Spanish. So you might be thinking, why the Dallas Fed? What we do is provide these free resources for banks, communities, nonprofits, and educators to use. And we do have specific programs to do train the trainer sessions with community organizations who use our materials with their audiences, and also provide training directly to teachers who are teaching some of those financial literacy standards. As part of our economic education team and my role at the Dallas Fed, I help to support our financial literacy efforts as well as develop resources for teachers to use in the classroom that are aligned to teaching standards. So today I'm going to cover the Building Wealth publication, the content that can be found in it, as well as introduces some of our new lessons that we have for the classrooms, and finish out the presentation for those of you that might be engaging students that are in elementary or middle school. So there are quite a few resources that we have around the system for grades pre-kindergarten all the way through 8th. So today I'd like to begin by sharing our Building Wealth publication with you. So here, I really want to walk you virtually through what you might find or see in the publication. I don't have enough time to walk you through the entire publication today, but I did want to highlight some of those chapters that are found in the book, such as Learn the Language, Budget to Save, Save and Invest, Build Credit and Control Debt, and Protect Your Wealth. The link to the publication will be in the chat if you would like to follow along. As I introduce each chapter found in Building Wealth publication, I will also spend time afterwards referencing some of the teacher lessons that we've had developed to accompany each chapter in the book to use with middle school and high school audiences. So chapter 1 actually begins with learning the language. Here you can see it's actually a screenshot from the first 2 pages in the publication. Although you might not be able to see the details that are in there, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the next slide. So this is kind of zoomed in on some of those interactive pieces that you can actually find in that print publication. What I like about the Building Wealth publication is it provides opportunities for students or even workshop attendees to start making changes right away. On page 1, it provides space for people to define what wealth is and what does it mean to them. We know that motivators are so important, and behavioral science shows us that it takes more than sitting in just one financial education class to really make the difference. What does financial capability really mean? It's having the knowledge and the tools to manage money. And Building Wealth publication helps to make positive changes in people's financial habits. Financial capability is nothing without that behavior change. So putting into actions is what really makes them become a reality. So as we go through the presentation today, whether you're a representative from a bank, a nonprofit, government, or even a teacher in the classroom, I want you to think about how Building Wealth can help facilitate that behavior change with your audiences. As a teacher, I was very familiar with the saying, begin with the end in mind. As I designed units of curriculum, I needed to start with what I needed my students to know, and then work backwards to design the unit. This is the same as the Building Wealth publication. Begin with the end in mind. Define where you want to end, and then start making those small changes to get there. Here we can see that everyone's definition of wealth will be different. Being able to put my kids through college might be a definition for wealth, or even help my children with their college costs. Having enough money to buy a home, retire by a certain age. Maybe it's just being able to provide basic needs, food and clothing and shelter for myself and my family. For high school students, they might even come up with buy a big house or drive a fancy car. You will know your audience best and how to connect with their needs and their situation, but Building Wealth is really intended to be a guide to that conversation. So before you get to setting goals, you first need to inventory where you are now. Think of how you use a map. You have to know your starting point. Chapter 1 is dedicated to just that. What are your current assets and liabilities? What do you own versus what you owe? If you joined us this week on Tuesday for the State of Financial Literacy, we heard from Donna Normandy, CRA Director at Frost Bank. And she mentioned that when they do outreach at Frost for financial literacy, they also start with the basics and even build upon vocabulary and basic understanding of their clients, which is great practice. For your reference, the Building Wealth publications follows different adult characters throughout the book. On page 2, we meet Anthony, and we learn that assets minus liabilities equals net worth. Anthony ends up preparing a balance sheet to see where he is towards reaching those goals. Your audience, whether it be a workshop attendees or students, can use the blank sheet found at the back of the publication to begin outlining their own net worth. The online guide at buildingwealth.org has built-in calculators. Also, there's an online guide. The online guide has all of the character worksheets, so you can have several different scenarios and examples to see. Remember that net worth is your wealth. It's not one variable, but many, and it's not just about how much money you have, and it's also about how much money you owe. Now that I've introduced chapter 1 in the print publication, I want to go ahead and let you know what you would find in chapter 2, which is all about budget to save. So chapter 2 begins with making small changes by setting some financial goals. Anthony, the character in Building Wealth I just introduced, had set a short-term goal to add $500 to his emergency fund this year. Long-term, he also wants to save for a down payment on a home, save for college, money for his kids, and also save for retirement. Remember, in the online guide, each character has their own set of goals. In order for anyone to meet those long-term goals, you first have to create that accurate budget. And the only way you can really learn where your money is going is to track it. So on the slide is an example of a day-to-day spending log found in chapter 2. It tracks Gabby, another character in the Building Wealth publication. She has written down everything that she is spending. Now, for your audience, this might not always be easy to do in one sitting. Depending on the number of counts someone has, this might get complicated to actually track all the spending accurately. There's checking, credit cards, debit cards, cash, various ways that you can transfer money through apps, online bill pay, preloaded debit cards, automatic payments, and all the spending that happens. Have you ever thought if only there were that many ways to save as there is to spend? Why is tracking your spending the most important first step to budgeting? Well, I can tell you most of us could sit here right now.
Morgan, I think you're on mute.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm not sure how I got on mute, but thank you for letting me know that, Armida. So what we're looking at is the tracking of spending. As I was saying, I think most of us could really track all of our expenses, our major bills, our house payments, our car payments. We probably know exactly how much our paycheck's going to be, but all of these income and expenses numbers are right off the top of our heads, but it's really not enough information to have a real budget. This is an opportunity and an important step to cover in any type of financial literacy programming. You have to track all of your spending first. So after tracking your spending comes the budget. Maybe a small change you can encourage your audience to make when using the Building Wealth publication is to create a budget. Within the publication, there's a blank page at the end where anyone can do just that. There are even Excel and PDF documents in the online resources to use as well. Here's an example of Gabby's budget. As you can see in the blue box at the very bottom, when she began to track all of her expenses, she realized that she was actually spending more than she was making. And this was an opportunity for her to go back and adjust this budget to create some type of savings goal. So chapter 3 really gets into the saving and investing. Building a foundation is the focus of the Building Wealth publication and the lessons. First, you must set the goals, budget, and if and when there are extra funds available, begin to save and invest. Chapter 3 introduces compound interest, risk and return, savings accounts, and the investment pyramid. It covers tools for savings and tools for investing, such as diversification, savings bonds, treasury bills, stocks, mutual funds, and retirement accounts. And chapter 3 concludes with investing in your house and owning your own business. It's foundational knowledge for both saving and investing. The publication even has a section that lists the investment options you would like to learn more about. Within the publication, there's also an illustration called the investment pyramid. The important takeaway here is the foundation, the purple section at the bottom. What is included in a strong financial foundation? You have to set your goals, both short-term and long-term, for what you're saving for. We've got our budget established. So once that budget's established, then it comes time to really looking at those financial records. organizing them, keeping the paper, and shredding the paper that you don't need to keep. Financial records are important to share with your audience as well. It includes keeping records for income taxes, keeping a copy of your tax receipts and tax forms, and checking your credit report every year so you can watch for identity theft and keep your credit in good shape. This might not be easy for all audiences that you interact with. My sister helps to run an outdoor homeless camp in Missoula, Montana. For her, this topic or even chapter would not be relevant to all the residents that live there. Her priority is just helping the residents get access to their Social Security cards, birth certificates, and ID cards. So she might also like to focus on the benefits of using a checking or savings account, or even just a bank and credit union. You will know your audience best, or what content would most likely be of help to them. The biggest takeaway here is it's smart to have a strong foundation before you start investing in higher risk return investments like stocks. Other important elements to the foundation are the insurance policies for your peace of mind. The first layer above that foundation should be the money that might not be needed within the next 3 years. This is the money that's you don't want to take much risk on. So obviously talking with your audience or even students about FDIC insurance through banks or savings accounts or savings bonds or other accounts that you can get to when you need it. These insured accounts are no risk, but at the same time, obviously have that low return. And sharing long-term savings options is also important. You'll want to invest in a little higher risk so you can get a little higher return. The publication doesn't give investment advice other than make sure that your audience is doing their homework. Excuse me. The last 2 chapters in the Building Wealth publication includes the topics of build credit and control debt and protect your wealth. Chapter 4 includes information on credit reports, and consumers have the right to receive that annual free copy of their credit report each year from the 3 major credit reporting companies. And the contact information is also included in that publication. Even after leaving a workshop or a classroom, your audience will have these resources and tools to bring with them. The publication also includes tips for building good credit and taking on debt and steps to control your debt. We know that credit is a good tool to have, but not everybody is in the position or ready to take on new credit. This might be an opportunity for you guys to see our website for ordering the Building Wealth publication. So on our website, there's actually a link where you can order copies of the Building Wealth publication if you're using them in your classroom, or if you're even using them with community organizations. Like Arminda mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, these resources are free. So all you have to do is enter your contact information and your shipping information, and we will send them out to you as an individual or even large copies if you're doing large programming with your audiences. So know that on our website, we do have that form. It's also available in Spanish as well. The online resources offers the Building Wealth publication as a PDF version. So if you are like us at the Dallas Fed and still doing virtual programming, this might be an opportunity that you can share these resources with your audience. The entire online guide has detailed examples of all the 6 characters, has downloadable worksheets to help you track expenses and budget, and also resources that we have created for teachers in the classroom, what I'll get to in a moment. So here's just a screenshot on the left-hand side of some of the resources that are available in the online guide for Building Wealth. It includes the who's who's, that's looking at all the characters in the publication. It has access, you can actually go to each individual chapter, or you can access the entire PDF on our website. And it also has the resources and tools that can be found at the back of the Building Wealth publication. So when I talked about those online resources, this is an example of Gabby's day-to-day spending log. At the very bottom in the purple box, This is the example where you can view her example. You can actually fill in your own spending log on the website. You can use an Excel document or even use a PDF document. So there's a lot of additional resources that can be found online if you're doing any type of programming. So I know we have a diverse audience here today of people representing the banking industry, nonprofits, community organizations, government, as well as educators in the classroom. I did want to point out that during my presentation, when I reference teacher resources, this includes lessons to use in middle school and high school classes that address financial literacy standards, and can also be used as part of the programming that banks, nonprofits might do on behalf of the outreach in the community. And they can also supplement the print and online resources for building wealth. So the teacher lessons are designed and aligned to high school teaching standards and developed with the middle school, high school audience in mind. The examples are varied, but they are developmentally appropriate for younger audiences. For example, when we speak about budgets, the examples are budgets of a high school student versus one of the characters that are adult, like Anthony or Gabby. Although they are designed for younger audiences, they can also help build vocabulary and content for adult audiences who might have limited prior knowledge of the banking industry, saving, and investment. So before I highlight some of the content in the lessons, I wanted to show you all the materials that can accompany each lesson. So we just finished updating lessons 1 through 5, which we'll highlight today in the presentation. And we are updating the remaining of the teacher resources. If you've used any of the teaching materials in the past, they were built with an interactive Adobe Flash. However, as of December 2020, Adobe discontinued its support of resources built with Flash. So in the new lessons release, lessons 1 through 5 on our website, they have been updated to include more diverse, culturally relevant examples and scenarios. Presentations have actually been built to be self-guided and even include prompts to hand out worksheets. In addition, we've added new content into the lessons from the Building Wealth publication. On the right side of the slide, you are seeing a screenshot of the additional resources and materials that might accompany the lesson, put it in the bank. So actually on the left side. So on the website, the lesson PDF, if you can see that on your screen, is referencing the presentation that helps to deliver that same content found in the publication to students. It also includes procedure documents, which are guided step-by-step instructions for each lesson. The step-by-step instructions also include suggested questions for discussion. So for me as a teacher in the classroom, some of the richest conversations I had with my students in finance really came from the conversations and the discussions that really dove deeper to understand what their scenario was or even examples. So in the procedure documents, we've also included some suggested teaching strategies of how to group students or even get them out of their chairs to respond. And we included prompts for each handout within that presentation. So the resources are available as a standalone PDF. This is something that's new in the new lessons. All of the handouts and answer keys can actually be found in the procedure documents, but we wanted to make sure that educators who are teaching in a virtual environment or even using a learning management system could attach or upload each individual handout or even assessment if needed. So the additional materials include assessments, guided notes, and handouts to really help to scaffold the learning and build upon the content that's covered. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce lesson 1, which is the balance sheet. Just like the publication, the teacher lessons also start with the balance sheet. So as we work through each chapter, I'll also reference some of those new lessons that are used in the classroom that align with that content in the publication. So just like the publication, the lesson asks students to brainstorm questions of what does building wealth mean to you? Wealth is obviously going to be defined different for every student. Key takeaways are that to be sensitive to diverse student backgrounds. For some students, this means that they're not going to be willing to share what wealth really means to them, because of sensitive situations such as poverty, being homeless, not having enough money to eat. That's perfectly okay not to share if you're working with young adults and teens. The brainstorm question, what does building wealth mean to you, also helps to level set and understand your students and the audience and their prior knowledge of financial concepts. This slide is intended to prep students that during the lesson, they will use examples to demonstrate how wealth is actually measured. So some key takeaways are the idea that simply having things or money doesn't make you wealthy if those things are accompanied by debt. If you still owe money on things, it doesn't make you wealthy. So throughout the lesson, students are introduced to the vocabulary and the definitions of net worth. For example, students might reference wealth means driving an expensive car, but that doesn't automatically make you wealthy. It really depends on how much you owe. Students will come up with all different types of wealth creating and depreciating assets. For example, my students always use the examples of shoes as wealth creating assets. They would buy a limited edition sneaker, not wear it, store it, and then sell it for a higher price at some point in the future. And for some students, their shoes were their wealth creating asset that couldn't easily been taken from a piggy bank and spent elsewhere. Now that example is not relevant to me, but it was with my students. For me, I wear my shoes until they're completely worn out. I still have hiking shoes from my early 20s that have yet to fall apart, so I keep them. My shoes are not limited edition sneakers and start depreciating the moment I buy them. So just remember that when you're working with teens, their examples are going to be a little bit different than an adult, and the lessons help to address this. So after setting a foundation of vocabulary, the lessons are also designed to scaffold the learning. What I mean by scaffold is the lesson builds upon itself in small steps. This is especially important with audiences who don't have prior knowledge. The presentation goes through 6 different scenarios where students can start to identify what are assets and liabilities. So we're going to take a look at just one of those. So this slide actually introduces a scenario where students are now starting to identify those assets and liabilities. And as a teacher in the classroom, or if I was even running a workshop, I would probably model this first for my students, work together on the second scenario, and then have them work in small groups to complete the rest of the handout. So here we have a character, Jose, who's 25 and a freelance app developer. His story starts to identify different types of assets and different types of liabilities. The next slide following the description is a slide to start to categorize assets and liabilities. What's nice about the presentation setup is it allows flexibility as the presenter. The lesson procedures include handouts to follow along, and depending on your audience, you can really differentiate the lesson. So this is a preview of the handout for students to follow along or even to work together in groups to review each of the examples. And here, we're just looking to see if students can correctly identify those different types of assets and liabilities. So you can even have students record their answers in the handout and then go over the answers in the presentation. This activity is not intended to be graded if you're a teacher, rather a check for understanding before moving on. You can either continue to use the presentation to walk through each scenario or even assign students to work with small groups with the handout. The previous activity was about identifying assets and liabilities. Next, we created another activity that will allow your audience to transfer that knowledge of asset and liabilities into the balance sheet. So here we have Sandra's balance sheet. This is actually the first time that they will see a balance sheet if you're not using the publication. And it also includes those wealth building and depreciating assets. So students are asked to first to sort the items into the correct category. So each lesson in the Building Wealth, like I said before, uses that scaffolded approach to teach students new concepts and to apply that learning. The last step also includes calculating that net worth. So after practicing Sandra's example, students can use the handout or the slide to try it on their own. So the try it on the own handouts that you find in each of the lessons can be used as an assessment or it can be used as just another activity to check for understanding. So really, we're looking here of, can students correctly identify assets and liabilities, categorize them correctly? They get to practice with Sandra, and then it's intended for them to try it on their own using a different example for Daniel, as you can see on the screen. So the teacher lessons also cover budgeting, but budgeting for a high school student might look a little different than an adult. The first lesson begins with understanding SMART goals. So just like the publication of setting goals, we take it a little bit farther and start discussing what are SMART goals, that they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Examples include write a SMART goal for earning an A in class, or even completing all of your homework. So before we jump into really thinking about financial goals, we want to make sure that students understand how to write personal goals or personal SMART goals. The goals for students are developmentally more appropriate in the lessons than you would find in the publication. For example, they're writing goals for the end of the semester, by the end of the summer, or even 1 year from now. The assessment used in the lesson has students complete personal and financial goals that they would like to reach by each of these different timeframes. So after setting goals, students also begin to learn what a budget is and identifying different needs and wants. So here's just a slide explaining some of that vocabulary, defining what is a budget and why you would need a budget to really understand where your money goes, identifying what kind of needs and wants, or what you're spending your money on and whether it's a need or a want, and meeting savings goals. So just like the publication, we emphasize the fact that to develop a budget, you also need to create those goals, track expenses, and categorize them into needs versus wants. So here you're looking at one of the handouts. In the publication, in the online guide, we called it a day-to-day spending log. But for students, we thought it was more appropriate to call it a consumption log. For high school students, instead of having them track those expenses, we purposefully designed it to track all of their consumption instead. So when I think of most teens and tweens, they're not always paying for everything they consume or buy. So this activity is actually helpful for young students to understand that if they expect to have the same level of consumption after moving out, or maybe even attending college or post-secondary education, to keep the same standard of living, it costs a lot. So this activity helps them identify everything that they consume, whether they're actually paying for it or not. Because we know that parents are paying for a lot of those things that they're consuming. And the lesson concludes with an opportunity for them to create their own budget of where am I going. So as you can see at the very top, this is called assessment 2. We did have the previous assessment of setting those goals, but depending upon your audience, it might be really hard for them to create a budget. So we suggested that this maybe could be an optional activity to do with students, because if they're not earning any income, or if they don't have any money to spend, it might be difficult to work with students to come up with a realistic budget, depending upon their scenario. So there are several lessons to address all the topics for educators to use in the classroom when it comes to save and invest. So although I won't deep dive into each of these lessons, I would like to introduce what they cover and the types of activities and extension assignments, and even the assessments that accompany each lesson. So lesson 3, students will actually evaluate the role of banks as financial intermediaries between savers and borrowers. So how do they fill that role of matching savers to borrowers? They end up learning to define and describe interest, describe the benefits of using a bank, compare various accounts offered by banks, and reconcile a bank statement. It gets into compound interest and the rule of 72. So here's an example of one of those try it on your own. So after going through the lesson and introducing interest and compound interest, students will have an opportunity to go online using an online calculator to really look at how interest grows over time and compound interest. One of the handouts is a bank comparison chart where students can start to identify different types of banks and the fees that might be associated with opening up different accounts and minimum opening balances. Here we've kind of modernized the traditional, balancing your checking account or reconciling your checking account, where we're looking at some digital receipts, where students can then look at a budget and see if they can find any errors based upon the receipts for someone that's spending. So the assessments, as you're seeing on the screen, we have two different assessments for lesson 3. The first one is a tic-tac-toe choice board. And this really allows students the choice of their own learning path. So essentially they're creating, 3 dots in a row to create that tic-tac-toe board, and a lot of different options for students to research what they're interested in. They include infographics, maybe reading assignments, as well as short videos. So it's an opportunity for students to really choose what they're interested in learning more about. And then there's a reflection piece that goes along with it. And we've also included just a traditional quiz where students can demonstrate whether they have met those learning objectives. So lesson 4 also continues on this theme of saving and investing, but it covers this idea of owning versus renting. So the publication, the Building Wealth publication, references investing in your home or starting your own business as a saving investing strategy. For students, we focused on just owning or versus renting, which aligns to teaching standards. So in this lesson, there's detailed sections that cover what are upfront costs of renting, what is renter's insurance, what's a lease agreement, what are responsibilities. I remember when I was teaching in the classroom, we used to always have a 9th grade parent night where parents would come in and they kind of go around to each subject area and learn about all the classes that were offered in high school. And this was my opportunity to kind of share all the different courses that we were offering within business and marketing. And when it came to like our financial literacy class, I always explained to parents of, financial literacy, these courses are the courses that are going to teach your kids the skill that someday, hopefully, when they move out, that they're going to be able to survive. These lessons are also teaching kids those foundational skills of someday when I leave my parents' home, I'm going to have to rent. And what does that look like? So I really like this lesson that it's introducing kids ahead of time of, what are those costs and what is a lease agreement? Why should I read it? And what kind of responsibilities go along with renting? We also want to include owning. So what is property value? What's a mortgage loan? Homeowners insurance? What's equity in a home? What are the responsibilities of home ownership and how does that differ from renting, and as well as the risks of home ownership? So the lesson on housing also has some extended learning opportunities that introduce housing discrimination, where students can read through the housing discrimination examples from HUD, so that's the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, and learn that discrimination isn't always obvious, and discuss discrimination that has happened because of race and color, religious discrimination, steering, discrimination against people with disabilities, or even family status or national origin. The assessments for this lesson include for students to have the opportunity to create a lease or buy video. We provided a template in case students don't have that technology to actually create the video, that they could just turn this in as an assignment. But they get to create a 1 to 2 minute video to explain whether they would prefer to lease or buy at the age of 25. So start getting them to think about the future. And there's also a lease agreement assignment where they get to view a very simplified lease agreement and then research some additional sections that weren't included that often exist in those types of rental agreements. So lesson 5 is the newest lesson that has been released, and it's all about the role of financial markets. So this lesson introduces the role of financial institutions and how they play a role in the markets for saving and investing. So students will be able to explain the benefits of saving and investing and develop a strategy to actually save for an emergency fund. So it introduces the investment pyramid that's found in the Building Wealth publication and allows students to compare that risk and return for saving and investing. So a couple slides that you can find in that presentation. Obviously, it goes into what type of savings can people save for. So really focusing on those short term, the different buckets that you can save for. So the down payment for a car, vacation, college, maybe even purchasing your first computer. And then it goes into emergency savings. So this is that money set aside in case of emergencies. And that might be home or car repairs, job loss, dental work, natural disaster, long-term illness, or even some type of emergency travel. So really introducing students not only for saving and investing, but first, you got to save for emergencies. So this is an example that's found within the lesson. Another scenario of a high school student. Here we're looking at his actual budget. At the very bottom, you can see that Trey, who's 17 and a senior in high school, is not saving anything. So the activity and the assignment is for them to go back and see how they can adjust that budget, building upon the prior lessons of identifying what's a need and what's a want, and allowing students to take a look at somebody else's budget and be able to adjust, maybe set a savings goal. So the next lesson is actually bonds, stocks, and mutual funds. It's currently in editing. It's not available on our website, but I wanted to let you know that it's coming soon. So this is going to be the heart and core of really the investment pieces that you can find in the Building Wealth publication. The rest of the lessons that we have online, if you were to visit our website, currently say under revision. So we are updating the remaining lessons since that Adobe Flash isn't working with them. So I did want to share this afternoon or close to evening some additional resources that are really geared towards younger audiences. When I think of the Building Wealth publication, it's geared mostly towards adults, and the examples include adult examples. The teacher lesson plans help to engage those middle school and high school audiences. But there are some resources that are developed around the system, the Federal Reserve System, and even outside of it that help to engage audiences if you're doing programming or if you're a teacher that's teaching elementary or middle school. So the first set of resources that I'd like to introduce actually come from the Kansas City Federal Reserve. They're all literacy-based lessons. So these are examples of different books. Now you can't access these books online for free, but they actually come with individual lesson plans that help to engage in those conversations. So here we can see through our elementary Bunny Money, Sweet Potato Pie, Those Shoes. I wanted to share a little bit about Those Shoes. It's probably one of my favorite books. So Those Shoes is actually a story of a little boy, Jeremy, who wants a particular style of tennis shoes. The shoes he wants happen to be those shoes all his classroom friends have, but his grandma says that he needs a new pair of boots for winter, and there's not enough money to purchase those shoes that he wants. The book actually follows Jeremy's journey of breaking his current pair of shoes, and the counselor at school gives him an extra pair, and it happens to be the pair that his classmates giggle and laugh at. So the journey of the thrift store to find a pair of shoes his grandma can afford. There he finds those shoes, the one the kids have in class, and he ends up getting them, but they're a size too small, and they hurt his feet, and he ends up not wearing them. The story continues with him giving them to another little boy in his class, this idea of charity. The story ends with him finally getting his new pair of winter boots that he needed. The lessons in this book go beyond just needs and wants. And if you don't even have the book, in your classroom, or don't want to buy 25 sets of these books, I will tell you, YouTube has almost every single book. It's normally other people reading those books, but it could be an option. I did try this book out on my own son, So he just turned 7 years old, and I wanted him to be my guinea pig on some of these elementary resources because I didn't teach in elementary, I taught in high school. I will say that he was able to identify different concepts of needs and wants, and enjoyed reading that book, or at least enjoyed. I told him that he got to help mommy at work. So I will tell you, my own kids have enjoyed going through some of these books and those lessons. So the St. Louis Fed actually has additional literacy-based lessons. They don't come with an entire lesson plan like the teachers, but they come with some parent Q&As, great conversation starters. These resources are really designed for kids ages 5 through 10. Some of the books, A Chair for My Mother, Curious George Saves His Pennies, You Can't Buy a Dinosaur with a Dime, and Just Saving My Money. So know that those resources are available. Following the presentation today, we're going to send out information or an entire document that has the direct links to all of these resources so you can access them at a later point. So I just wanted to remind you, if you're trying to copy and paste all the different links that are getting put into the chat, we are going to be sending an entire document with all of these different resources to you. So My Money is actually an educational workbook for students in elementary school. Topics include money, coin equivalents, jobs, goods and services, and barter. My son's in first grade. I know that he was actually learning this just a couple weeks ago. This was a resource that I shared with his first grade teacher and said, hey, probably a little bit late this year, but I wanted to make her aware that it's a workbook. So it's a couple different pages. Kids start identifying coins, they start counting coins, matching, there's math lessons that are built into that. So if you're engaging with kids in elementary, or if you're an elementary teacher that's joining us this evening, we know that those standards are, especially for Texas, expect kids to be able to teach this. And the My Money workbook is a great resource to use. Piggy Bank Primer, this is actually a story, and it includes activities about financial literacy concepts. It includes savings, spending, budgeting, wants, goods and services, and opportunity costs. So the My Money publication is a publication that's offered to the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond and is available to order copies or classroom copies to be able to use. Piggy Bank Primer is currently only available online as a PDF. So if you're using it, you could use it in a virtual environment, or you could download it and print it yourself if you're using it, but they're no longer printing that and shipping it to customers. So Dollars and Cents, a budgeting game, is kind of a foldable brochure. This one is developed by the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, where students select a lifestyle. So they get to choose what type of home that they would like to live in, how would they like to get around, what kind of internet speed that they would like, how much they want to save, what kind of clothing they want to wear, and entertainment. And then what will you eat? So it goes through all of these different scenarios. And at the very end, they actually start building a budget of, if this is my life, if this is the life that I'd like to choose, this is how much it's going to cost. So this is definitely something that you could do with maybe 4th, 5th graders, or even middle school students. So the New York Fed has an entire suite of comic books. And they do provide limited numbers to households, and you can order larger quantity of those comic books. So these sets are available on a first come, first served basis, and sometimes can take up to 4 to 6 weeks to get delivered. But if you'd like to use some of these comic books, I'd encourage you to order them well in advance. Here I'm just highlighting 2 of them that have to deal with financial literacy. So Once Upon a Dime is a story of a growing economy, and focuses on the concepts of barter, currency, and banking. And then the story of Interest and Supervision explores the concepts of interest, savings, budgeting, and then the Fed's supervisory roles, and helping to promote safe and soundness within the financial system. One of my coworkers out of El Paso has a 10-year-old daughter, and he ordered all the comic books for her. And she actually gave me a quote to use with you guys today. And she said that she loved the characters because it really helped her learn about her dad's job and learn how money changed all over these years. So it's nice to see that kids who are in that age of middle school are really enjoying, or elementary and middle school are enjoying these types of comic books. So the next resource actually doesn't come from within the Federal Reserve System. It actually comes from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And they just released an entire suite of what they call their Money Monster stories. So there's 5 different books. One is learning all about careers. One's learning how to become good borrowers, learning to protect their things, learning to save, and learning what things really cost. So you have to order a minimum of 25, as it says on their website, but they can be downloaded as a PDF or accessed online for free. So they have a financial intuition podcast that is actually helped to are created to help listeners with tips and strategies to find their inner financial intuition. And then one money topic at a time. So there's a podcast that's also available. So the goal of the podcast is to educate, inform, and engage with tools and resources to make informed financial decisions. So they have a lot of resources, not only for communities, but for parents on their website. But I wanted to highlight their new Money Monster stories. The story that you can see the cover on the slide, Money Monsters Learn What Things Really Cost. And it kind of follows the story of these little monsters who want to buy an animal. And they find out how much animals cost. And he really wanted to buy a tiger in the story until he found out exactly how much it would cost to feed a tiger. So at the very end of the story, he ends up buying a little tiny kitten that happens to look like a tiger and called it Tiger. So they're cute, stories that help to begin those conversations about finances, about costs, about savings and needs. So I wanted to definitely share that one with you this evening. So that's the end of my presentation. My contact information is here if you have any questions. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Armida and see if we have any questions from the audience.
We do, Morgan. We have plenty. So thank you again for the abundance of information. This was really good. We are going to open up for questions. So please do continue to use the chat feature, drop your questions there, or use the raise your hand feature, and we're happy to call on you so you can come off mute. I have some questions already from the chat. One question from Carmela W. Is there a section that talks about employment industries, wages versus their budget?
No, but we do have another resource that addresses not only careers, wages, and it's called Navigate. So Navigate is one of our teacher resources that was developed for middle schoolers who are really starting to navigate both college and careers, and introduces, researching how much not only college costs, but how much you can earn with different types of careers. So it's a very in-depth resource. It comes as a teacher guide. It's a print resource. We have it available as a fillable PDF online if you're doing any type of online programming. It's really intended, to be a step-by-step workshop type model. So if you're working not only in the classroom, but with the community, it has an entire teacher guide as well as the student workbook, and it's consumable. So students are writing in it, or they can use the online fillable PDF. I would direct you to that resource. It's a great one. And to be honest, I think we've shipped over 1 million copies into schools. So it's well liked and well received.
And I think Evelyn just dropped the link on the chat, but we'll make sure to add that as well to the resource list that Morgan mentioned earlier today. There is a question from PK Joseph. Great lessons, Morgan. Do we know the degree of difficulty experienced by students in understanding these important concepts? And as a follow-up, are they reinforced as students advance through the grades?
Okay, so great question, PK. As far as understanding, their level of awareness and what they're learning. Let me go back to that question. Can you repeat the very first part? I got the second half.
Yeah, sure.
We have the degree of difficulty experienced by students understanding. I don't know the degree of difficulty except my own experience as an educator. So when I was teaching in the classroom, and when I was teaching AP macroeconomics, so students were essentially in a college course in my classroom. And it was about my 5th year of teaching. I was finally getting comfortable with the content. I wasn't afraid anymore when students raised their hand because they might have a question. I started to see my students struggle. And I was really reflective as an educator going, okay, what am I doing wrong? Like I finally feel like I've got this. And after reflecting for a while, I realized that I forgot what it was like to not know. I forgot what it was like to not know what interest rates were. And, as a teacher, you have good moments and you have bad moments. One of those bad moments, I'd gotten all the way through monetary policy, which takes about 6 weeks. And I had a student tell me, she goes, exactly, I just don't really get what interest rates are. And in that moment, I realized I failed as an educator. I forgot what it was like to not know how interest rates interact. That vocabulary is missing from the majority of students. I mean, I think it's really hard as an adult or an educator who's been in the classroom a long time to really think of that. So I know that it was difficult. It was a degree of difficult that my students did not come in with prior knowledge. And this is even in the high school where students are opting in to go into one of these advanced courses. I had to really rethink my teaching of understanding that they don't come in with vocabulary. I also had a deaf student in my class one year. She had a sign language interpreter with her full time. And bless her heart, she had assigned supply and demand graphs in mirror image. I'm not quite sure how she ever did it. But she told me, she goes, there's no signs for the vocabulary. She ended up meeting with the deaf economics professor because there in ASL, a lot of the vocabulary that I was even talking about in the classroom, there's no sign language that's developed for it. So the degree is high. And I think the best, solution is to assume that they're not coming in with that knowledge and to also be reflective of remembering what it's like to not know as well.
I think that's good feedback. We have one follow-up question related to Navigate, I believe. Is there any section that talks about how to navigate wages, theft, and resources for unprotected employees and contractors?
Wages, theft, and protection.
And resources for unprotected employees, contractors.
I'm not aware of any off the top of my head, but I know there's some folks around the system that are doing a lot of work in workforce or even our community development. So although I don't have that answer for you, there's definitely going to be a department, or if it's not us, it's going to be someone like the CFPB that are going to have those resources. So we'd love to be able to follow up with you and direct you. I don't have that answer, but I'm sure there's definitely some resources that are out there.
Excellent. We'll follow up. Since you were talking of central banking and monetary policy, I will ask you this question. Is the concept of inflation part of the curriculum at some level? The idea that if income does not grow, at least by inflation, will fall behind. So maybe it's a hidden expense. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
So I did address it in the Building Wealth lessons. It's going to show up in lesson 6. When we start talking about investing and the role of inflation, and it actually introduces like the real interest rates. So, the interest rate that you're earning, that nominal interest rate, and then taking a look at inflation and what's your real return. So I know I've built that into the lessons that you're going to see in lesson 6. It's coming up. It's in the curriculum for students to understand those effects of inflation as well.
Which is a difficult concept in itself, right?
Yes, especially when inflation's been relatively low for so long and they don't have those examples of, the early 80s.
Yes, or another country where inflation is skyrocketing. A question from Tilda N. Morgan, what are some innovative ways to teach financial literacy to first generation and low income students?
Yeah, so I think when I first think of innovative, I think of technology or gamification. But that question is really thinking about first generation and low income students. So as I think of innovative, I think you have to involve your community, especially for those first generation students or low income students, to make it relevant to them. So I guess in the virtual environment, we have the opportunity to invite guest speakers in, or even if you're in the classroom and back in person, you can still invite somebody virtually into your classroom. Connect with your community members who maybe had success, or local entrepreneurs that can relate, both with experiencing growing up in low income communities or being a first generation a family member. You can even partner with community-based organizations that really focus in that specific area as well. I think the better you know your students, the better that you can connect with them. That's the innovative piece, right? It might happen outside of the classroom, and bringing folks in to see that, I too can be successful. So that would be my piece of advice of, really getting innovative to reach that specific audience.
Similar conversation that we had in our first session, where we had Frost Bank CRA officer as well as Kristen from the Plano Library. We talked a lot about community partnerships there. Okay,
Absolutely.
good feedback. We have a question that I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Kevin R. asked, how can we at schools help young students have a better relationship with money? And he used an example of Watchdog Dads program, which I'm not familiar with, Morgan. So I'm not sure if you are, and if you are, please, whatever you could comment on that, that would be great.
Sure. So I am aware of Watchdog Dads only because they do it at my son's elementary school. I'm not part of the Watchdog Dads because I'm a mom, but from my understanding is they're on campus. They're helping support. They're, that male role model that students get to see. Watchdog Dads also does some maybe after-school programming. One, I think it's great that we have this at local elementaries, that parents are involved, but maybe it's an opportunity to engage with additional programming at your school, to ask. There's financial literacy standards in math, grades K through 8th. They're there, teachers are teaching it. I would encourage you to maybe offer your group or yourself to help support in that programming. Obviously, I shared a lot of these resources tonight. That could be something that could help engage students. And when I think about kind of financial concepts, I remember sending my son Luke to school last year. He was in kindergarten. And this is my first experience. He's my oldest. And around the holiday times, they had like this holiday store. So you're supposed to send your kids with money, and they get to go around and buy something for their family. And they were supposed to like create a budget. Well, the fact that I'm his mother, of course, I sat down and we created a budget, and we budgeted for each person, and I sent him with the entire list. And when he got home, we reconciled. He came home with money. I was so proud of him. But not every kid's going to have that experience. Maybe that's an opportunity where Watchdog Dads could maybe step in and help support. And that's a teachable moment. That's hands-on and could address financial literacy. So I would encourage you to ask the schools, maybe see if you can partner with local community organizations that would be willing to support that work, or even financial institutions as well. And that might be an opportunity to go back beyond just what you're doing in Watchdog Dads and in your school.
Thank you, Morgan. We have one more question here. My students do not trust much of the news these days and are weary of financial advice, even from the government. How do you teach students who to trust in personal financial education after they graduate from high school specifically? But I guess we can also talk about before graduating from high school as well.
Well, I'd like to just tell you to trust the Federal Reserve, because we're technically not the government. But if your students don't even trust the government, that's probably not going to work. When it comes to trust, I'm going to just give you, like, from my teachers perspective, your kids trust you enough to be able to express that, to be able to communicate that. So I think the best advice I could give is leverage that trust in your classroom. We're not going to be able to change every student, but that's not going to stop us from sharing trusted resources that even might come from the government. So be able to model. I had a student like that a few years ago. He's in my entrepreneurship class, and he was in my banking and financial system services class. And he didn't believe in like the bank or credit, or never wanted to invest. He wanted to operate only in cash. But I still continued to challenge him. Like, he was building a business plan. He needed to have capital to open up his business plan. So he might have not wanted to, but I never stopped. You got to keep trying. If kids don't trust it, they trust you. So my best piece of advice is give them as much as you can and hope it sticks when they leave your classroom.
And I'm curious, Morgan, did he change his mind and opinion?
No, nope. And that's okay. I tried my hardest, but I think sometimes, students come in with different scenarios and different family situations. That doesn't surprise me at all. I would say my own family was like that. My dad was always, oh, you never have to invest, and he doesn't get the fact that I invest money even to this day. And he's old. I'm never going to change his mind either. So, you just got to try to do your best.
And you never know, right? Maybe that's something that the young man thought about years later after he had a full-time job, right?
Yeah.
And the situation changed then. And he maybe remembered Morgan Ackley telling him a few years back.
That's the golden moment as a teacher.
Yeah. So I don't see any other questions unless I am missing anything. It doesn't look like I do. So I will begin wrapping up just again by thanking you, Morgan, for all this great information you've given us. I will emphasize for our audience today that we have a new e-learning program that will allow users to learn the basics of building wealth, whether on their own or perhaps in a computer learning center. And we designed this resource with nonprofit service providers, financial coaches, as well as job training programs in mind. We trust this will hopefully be useful for their clients. And so if you're interested and would like to partner on that resources, do contact us. I believe our colleagues will be dropping off an email address where you can contact us, and we'll make sure to follow up with that information as well if you're interested in learning more. So with that, we do thank you for participating in today's discussion. Be on the lookout for a post-meeting survey on its way to you. This will hopefully help us design future programs like this, and we can improve upon this. And if we missed any of the programming this week, we'll make sure to send you recordings that will be available on demand on our website, and we'll definitely be sending you a communication with all the resources that we shared over the past week, including information on an upcoming program called Women in Economics, which is a program that will feature top corporate and academic economists speaking on demographics of the economics profession and potential implications of that. So with that, thank you again. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you to our audience and for everybody that stuck with us all week long. And with that, we adjourn.